According to my Goodreads, I have read 174 fantasy and sci-fi books in my life, and it's finally time to answer the question, which are my top 10 best fantasy books I have ever read. Now, just to make this video even possible, then I'll only allow one book from one series, and if you don't see your favorite books on this list, then it's pretty likely that I haven't read them. See, I've only read adult fantasy for 3 years, so I still have a ton of popular books I haven't read. So don't get angry if your favorite book is not on the list. Also, I can't rank these, so this will just be a top 10 list in no particular order. And this is not a serious ranking, okay? Just favorite books. Alright, let's get into it. Let's start with some honorable mentions first. The Hunger of the Gods by John Gwynne. I read this book earlier this year and it literally saved me from a reading slump. If you're looking for a fast-paced, Norse-inspired fantasy adventure, I would highly recommend checking out the Bloodsworth Saga by John Gwynne. The Ocean at the End of the Lane by Neil Gaiman. I don't know how to explain it and why I love this book, but this book just filled me with wonder. A very atmospheric and magical read. The Exile by Ryan Cahill. This is arguably the best fantasy novella I've ever read. This is book 4 in the series, so you'll have to read the other books first in the series. But I was incredibly impressed by Kyle's ability to write such a vivid, action-packed and compelling story in so few pages. Some of my other honorable mentions are The Great Hunt, The Poppy War, The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. Alright, without further ado, let's get to my top 10 favorite fantasy books, ranking in no particular order. First up we have The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien. I don't feel like I need to say much about this book, since almost everyone knows so much about it. I had to read this book during my A-levels, and we analyzed it in class, and we had to do a presentation, and I just loved it. The Hobbit is such a magical and fun read, and you can't really go wrong with Tolkien's hobbits, dwarves, and his world building. This is an absolute classic and it deserves all the love. Next up, we have Ship of Magic by Robin Hobb. I knew I had to include a Robin Hobb book in this list, and my favorite book by her as of now is Ship of Magic. The Lifeship Traders trilogy was one of my priority series to read and finish this year, and I'm so glad I did. I loved Robin Hobb before picking up this series, but she's now become one of my all-time favorite authors, with the Lifeship Traders trilogy being the best I read from her as of now. Absolutely incredible world building, compelling and complex characters, and beautiful writing. Next up, we have a book that is definitely in my top 3 books of all time. Now, I know that this is not a ranking, but if it was, then this will probably be the first or second spot, and that is no other than Jade Legacy by Fonda Lee. There are very few books out there that have been able to pull out such emotions in me. The pure scope and ambition in writing a book like this that literally spans over 10 years' time, following a huge cast of characters, while simultaneously being able to make you feel invested in every single plotline and characters, is just astounding. I love how Fonda Lee doesn't just build up towards a single climax and then the book concludes. Rather, we get to see all of these smaller and bigger conflicts affect different nations and families over a long span of time. I can't even fathom how anyone is able to write such a complex and yet compelling story. I could go on and on talking about the Greenbone Saga, but I will say that this book and series deserves all the hype. It's simply a masterpiece. Moving on, I have 2 self-published books on this list, and the first one is The Sword of Kagan by M.L. Wong. Well, if you're involved in the indie community, then you will know that this is the darling of the community, and for good reasons. M.L. Wong truly brings something new to the table with The Sword of Kagan. The world building is very interesting, where you have this, I suppose you could say, more conservative society that lives very cut off from the world. And this society doesn't have all the modern technology and so on. And outside of this society, you have the modern world. Just that concept is just very interesting to me. But what really stood out was 2 main things. Firstly, we reached the absolute climax of this book at the 50% mark. And then the second half of the story just focuses on the aftermath of this big event. Now, we often see climax at the very end of fantasy books, and then we have very little time to see what happened afterwards. But that is not the case with The Sword of Kagan. And that brings me to my second point, the themes. Emma Wong beautifully explores the themes of loss, depression, trauma, and post-traumatic stress in this book. It is explored in a way that I've never seen before, and it is truly a compelling read. The other indie book on my list is Illborn by Daniel T. Jackson. The author kindly sent me this massive book a year ago or so, and I literally had no idea what to expect, but all I can say is, wow. This book literally consumed me. We basically follow 4 different POVs, and these 4 characters seem very unrelated initially, and then we follow these characters' journeys, and what is amazing is that I loved every single POV in this book. I was absolutely immersed in every single plotline, and it's been a while since I felt this immersed in a story. There is so much intrigue, incredible characters, and the stakes are really high. This book is like 800 pages, but it definitely didn't feel like that at all. I loved every single chapter of this book. I really truly didn't want this book to end at all, and I was left with a very bad hangover when it finished. The Final Empire by Brandon Sanderson. You knew that this was gonna be on here. The Mistborn trilogy is one of the first adult fantasy books I picked up, and it's literally one of the reasons why you are watching this video right now. The Mistborn trilogy played a key role in helping me fall in love with fantasy and reading again. I just loved the idea behind this trilogy. What if the Dark Lord won? Also, the writing style, the characters, the magic system is all just so iconic and well done. I won't say much more because it seems like everyone has heard about the Mistborn trilogy 8,000 times, but if you haven't read Mistborn yet, I would highly recommend picking it up. And when you read this series, I would go on and explore all of Sanderson's other work. And before we continue, I just want to say a thank you to my patrons who support what I do here. I really appreciate it. Wisdom of Crowds by Joe Abercrombie. You knew I had to include one First Love book here, didn't you? Choosing a favorite First Love book is hard because almost all of them are incredible, but I think the one that made the biggest impact on me was The Wisdom of Crowds. The Wisdom of Crowds is the final book in the Age of Madness trilogy, and it is so good. The character work is some of the best I've ever seen. The themes are fantastic, and the plot is full of twists and takes so many unexpected turns. I also absolutely love the fact that we actually see the world progress in the First Law universe. New technology has started popping up, which is leading to the society changing, and I just love when authors allow their world to progress. We don't see fantasy world progress that often into the modern era, which I think is a shame. But if you are a fan of Grimdark and enjoy incredible characters, then check out the First Law series. Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. I read this book earlier this year and it was a huge surprise. I randomly picked up this book because I was in the mood for something short and a standalone, and this quickly became one of my all-time favorite books. Piranesi is one of those books that the less you know going in, the better the reading experience, so I won't say much about it, but I will say that Clarke's ability to create this eerie and mysterious atmosphere is some of the best I have ever come across. Also, the themes are super interesting and really well handled. Piranesi is a book that is very, very different from anything I've ever read, and I can highly recommend it if you haven't read it yet. It is very different, but it is worth it. Alright, Stephen King. I knew I had to choose at least one Stephen King book on this list, but choosing my all-time favorite King book is almost impossible. But since we're talking about fantasy here, I'll choose a book that is arguably one of his most epic fantasy-esque books, and that is The Wastelands, the book 3 in the Dark Tower series. Now, the Dark Tower series is definitely one of my all-time favorite series. So since this is book 3, I won't say much about it because of spoilers, but I will say, if you are looking for some very original and unique fantasy, then pick up the Dark Tower series. This series is one of my all-time favorite series, and one of the main reasons why is just because it is so original. There is nothing like the Dark Tower out there, and out of the 8 books in the series, The Wasteland is my favorite book. A truly incredible read with high stakes, fantastic characters, and a lot of unexpected twists and turns. And the very last book on this list is Ruin by John Gwynne. Now, I read all of Gwynne's work and I am a huge fan. Now, I don't think that Ruin, which is the 3rd book in the Faithful and Fallen series, is Gwynne's best writing, but it is the book that emotionally impacted me the most. There are so many incredible character moments in this book, and the ending truly left me shocked. Ruin is one of the very few books that I literally had to put down for a couple minutes because the reading experience was just so intense. If you haven't read any of Gwynne's work, then I would highly recommend checking out either The Faithful and the Fallen or the Bloodsworn Saga. Both series are absolutely exceptional. So that is it. There are still so many great books out there that I've yet to read, so I'm sure that my top 10 list is going to change in the next year or so. But for now, these are my top 10 favorite fantasy books. Have you read any of my favorites? Do you have a top 10 favorite books list? I would love to hear from you in the comments down below. Thank you so much for watching. See you in the next video.